Author's House. Hey everyone, welcome to today's author interview. I'm Gab from Authors Press and I'll be your host. We are excited to have Forrest Oldham with us, the author of California Covered Bridges Pre-1900s. Without further delay, let's dive into our conversation. Hi, Forrest. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and without spoiling, can you tell us about your book, California Covered Bridges Pre-1900s?
Yeah, I'm an older person that's been involved in a lot of different organizations and has always had a curiosity of just about anything and everything that I've encountered. Everything from astronomy to photography to physics. I mean, you name it. I've had an interest in it, and I belong to a photo club here where I live, and was asked to uh, lead the photo trips, the photo excursions on a monthly basis to different places to shoot different kinds of things or whatever. And I didn't want to just go out and shoot petunias all the time. So I thought, well, sitting in front of my computer one day, I says, I wonder if there's any covered bridges in California. I mean, I know about them in the East Coast, but who knows of any in California? And I just Googled it up and found out that there's close to 100 of them, and there were still seven of them that were built during the gold rush, and I went about visiting them and taking our photo club to a couple of them and everything. And my wife and I would visit the others. We had the list. My wife and I would visit the others as we traveled about the state doing various other things, and we'd just make a point of going by and photographing them. And in the process, learned a lot about them. And then it's like, what do you do with the photographs? And I thought, well, I've always wanted to write a book, so this might be a perfect opportunity to make a kind of a tabletop picture book, just to introduce people to these wonderful covered bridges that were built during the gold rush.
Beautiful.
Um,
Can you please provide a description of covered bridges and explain their significance?
well, the covered bridges here in California were a function of people coming out from the East Coast to get rich doing gold panning and the like, and they found out that they were actually making more money by making covered bridges. Some of these guys were bridge builders, and the bridges they knew how to make were covered bridges from the East Coast. It turns out California, during the gold rush began in 1849, and 1850 California became a state. One of the first tasks that the state legislature set upon was to permit people to build these bridges and charge a toll for their use. And so many of these bridges were paid off in a matter of weeks, believe it or not. And it turns out there was close to 350 of them built during the gold rush here, and of those 350, there's actually only six that remain because one of them burned down recently in 2018. That would be the Honey Run covered bridge.
Very interesting. How many covered bridges are still
Oh,
standing?
yeah. Well, there's the six of them from the gold rush. You asked, what is a covered bridge? Well, basically, um, in that era, most of the structures were built from wood, and the big heavy timbers that were used to make the floor of these bridges were hard to replace, and they were also very expensive, and they didn't want them to wear out, so they would put coverings over inexpensive coverings over the rest of the bridge that they could replace periodically to protect the lower members. And that was the whole idea behind covering the bridges. It wasn't about keeping the weather off of the traffic and things like that. It was just to keep the bridges from having to be repaired prematurely.
Interesting. Are covered bridges still being constructed today? What makes California's covered bridges unique and special?
They're absolutely being built even today. As I told you, we had a list of almost 100 of them, and only the seven of them were the ones that were before the year 1900. The rest of them were built after the year 1900. For instance, there's three of them up on I believe it's the Elk River in Northern California, that are about a mile apart. They were identical bridges, and they were built like in the 1930s. And only one of them is still useful. Okay, The other two are kind of decrepit. One of them they just allow cows to go over and across or whatever. The other one is just plain not used. Um, what makes them special is it's kind of interesting because in California we have the longest free span covered bridge in the world, depending upon how you measure it. That's for starters. That's one of the seven. Okay. Another one is the oldest covered bridge in California. Okay, it's a small bridge that has just been refurbished. You can now drive across it. We have the tallest covered bridge in the United States, in California here, outside of Santa Cruz. We have the Powder Works covered bridge, which is a bridge still in use, and it's access to an island in which they produced gunpowder and dynamite and the like. That's why it's called Powder Works, because that stuff's a powder. Okay. We also have the longest covered bridge, at least in the Western United States, if not the entire United States, but it has supports in the middle of it. So, each of these bridges has kind of their own little unique feature about them. And without these bridges, you don't have the gold rush because you had to have a way to get your resources and stuff back and forth over all these rivers. The bridge builders from the East Coast didn't really know how to address these rivers here. The West Coast rivers have a greater fall. That means they fall a greater distance, 3 or 4 or 5 feet for every mile, versus maybe 12 inches per mile on the East Coast. And as a function of that, they didn't realize the rivers would rise 30 or 40 or 50 feet. And so those 350 bridges, a good many of them just got washed away almost immediately in one of our big rain years or whatever. Um, so that's why it's significant that the ones that still remain are still up and around.
That's very
And
fascinating.
I mentioned the Honey Run covered bridge is unique in that the roofs on most of these they're straight across, and the same level all the way across the bridge. And the Honey Run, though, for some reason they decided to raise the roof a little bit in the middle of the bridge, so you had a little step in the middle of the bridge. It's about 2 feet high, and then it went set back down to the lower level on the other end of the bridge as well. So it was kind of unique when it was still standing. It actually, by the way, they're going to rebuild that bridge. They're in the process of it right now.
Beautiful. What inspired you to write a book specifically about California's covered bridges from the pre-1900s era?
Well, as I mentioned before, I had all these photos and didn't know what to do about them, except that I knew the bridges are. I'm a carpenter, and so I appreciate good carpentry, good woodworking, if you will. And I thought others might be inspired by seeing this woodworking too. A lot of people when they first encounter some of these, like the Nyes Crossing covered bridge, it's pretty spectacular. It spans 200 feet without any support in the middle, and it's all wood. California it's a state park now. California just refurbished that bridge so you can walk across it now. 3 or 4 years ago, you couldn't walk across it because they were in the process of refurbishing it. But I mean, just to walk through that bridge and see the structure and everything, even people that don't know anything about carpentry and structure and things, they're pretty impressed. They really are.
That's very inspiring. Can you share with us some of the experiences and struggles you faced while researching and writing this book?
Well, there's really not a whole lot of literature about this to start with. Um, and probably if I was to think about the biggest struggle was in the fact that I'm an Uber slash Lyft driver, okay, a rideshare driver, and I get people in my car and get to talking about these bridges from time to time, and especially back, shortly after the Paradise Fire, was burning down that bridge, the Honey Run covered bridge. I had a number of people in the car that had an attachment to that bridge in some fashion or another. I'll give you an example of that. I was driving a lady and her like 8 or 10 year old son, and they were in the back seat, and we were talking, and the little boy he came up with a great big word in some of the conversation we had, and I was taken surprised by that. And at the time, I had like a couple of my books, sitting next to me in the front seat there, between me and the console there or whatever. And so I asked this little boy, I says, that's a pretty big word for somebody such as you. Where did you learn that word, and did you find out what it means? He goes, well, I found out what it means at school, but I learned it from the Grinch. And I was so enamored with that I started grabbing one of my books. It turns out it was the Honey Run Covered Bridge book, and it says Honey Run Tribute on the front of the cover. Okay, and I lifted it up so he could see it. And I says, son, you keep working on words like that, and perhaps someday you can write a book like I did. And I held it up, and he took one look at that book. I'm sorry, it's breaking me up a little bit. He took one look at that book, and he says, "That's where my dad takes me swimming." I said, "Here, son, have a book." And I mean, I'd hear story after story like that. People that had an attachment to that particular bridge, and I mean, they hold bar mitzvahs and weddings and all kinds of other events. They're just playing a hangout. It's near Chico State. It's halfway between Chico State and the town of Paradise, which totally burned down, killing some 70 people or something in the Paradise fire that actually called it the Camp Fire. It's named after Campfire because that's the name of the road where it started, was Camp Road. It's not because it was a campfire that started it. It's because they always label these fires after the roads where they start.
That's very inspiring. Thank you for sharing that. How do you think the covered bridges in California have contributed to the state's development and history?
Well, as most people know, California in itself is like the fifth or seventh largest economy in the world if you take California all by itself.
Right.
Okay? We are a very significant part of the United States. And if it wasn't for the gold rush, California would not have developed into what it is now, probably. The gold rush, was the impetus for creating the bridges, which in turn were the impetus for creating the roadways and the like. As a matter of fact, Highway 49, which goes north and south through the inner part of California, is named after the 49ers, and it's goes through basically the gold country where a lot of this gold mining was done. And it's, I mean, a lot of these people became very wealthy just because they built these bridges.
Very great. What significance do these covered bridges hold in today's society, and why do you believe they are important to preserve?
Well, I think history that people can see, feel, and touch is important in general. And the fact that these six still remain after all these years, and they're in great shape, by the way, considering how old they are. I mean, they're over 100 years old. Okay, they were built in like 1860, 1870, 1880, thereabouts, and that's 130, 140 years ago. Okay, that's for starters. They hold every bit of importance to California's development. This ought to be important to fourth grade students. Okay, in fourth grade in California here, you study California history, and they study the missions and the Indians and the gold rush. But up till now, they haven't mentioned anything about the covered bridges. And a lot of the kids, they will build a mission, a little replica of the missions or whatever. Well, why couldn't they build a replica of one of the bridges? Without the bridges, we don't have California that we have today.
Right.
So I mean, my family and I, uh, uh, back in the day, when my kids were younger, we visited a number of the missions as part of their fourth grade education. We said, okay, so we took a family trip for a week or so and visited 6 or 8 or 10 of the missions, and it was an important part of our kids' development.
Those are very important points. Thank you. What are some interesting stories or facts you discovered about these bridges during your research that you would like to share with the readers?
Well, who doesn't? Who has not heard about Yosemite National Park? Everybody has heard about it. I mean, we get people from all around the world to go to Yosemite. On the way into Yosemite from the south end, there's the very first covered bridge or the first bridge to enter the Yosemite Park was on that end of the park down that way. And if you're driving on the regular asphalt road across the concrete bridge, you probably would not notice there's a bridge. But if you take it and make a point to go up there and find the bridge, you'd find out it's pretty interesting. I call that bridge the most often seen and the fastest forgotten bridge. The reason being because once people see that bridge, they move on to the Yosemite Valley and the Lake and Glacier Point and all those other places, and they're just so awestruck with all of Yosemite that they completely forget about that bridge. If you ask them, "Hey, did you see the covered bridge a couple years later or whatever?" They go, "Oh, yeah. Matter of fact, I kind of remember something about that. Yeah, okay." But otherwise, they wouldn't even talk about it. But they'll talk about Yosemite Falls and Half Dome and all that other stuff, the Merced River and everything. They'll talk about all that stuff, but not the bridge.
Very interesting. Thank you. In what ways do these covered bridges serve as a focal points for local events, and can you provide examples of such events?
Oh, absolutely. There's a bridge down in on the way to Yosemite, as a matter of fact. It's called the Knights Ferry Covered Bridge. It's if you're going down Highway 120 east of Stockton towards Yosemite, there's just a little sign on the right side of the road that says Knights Ferry, 1 mile and make a left turn, kind of a thing, right? It doesn't say that it's a covered bridge or anything like that. It's a major county park. Well, every year, or at least up until COVID hit, they would hold a Civil War reenactment there. They brought in cannons and rifles and the Civil War reenactors, and I mean they're in full dress and everything, and they put on quite a show for the weekend there. It was that in itself is pretty interesting. They continue to build bridges even today because they're the covered bridges because they are so picturesque and just fun to look at. There's a number of them now that are actually made out of more modern materials, but still look like a covered bridge. And that's the other 60 or 70 of them on that list that I told you about early on here. The list of covered bridges in California. There's actually one or two of them in Disneyland that most people don't even know about because there's so much going on. They don't even notice, oh, there's a covered bridge.
Perfect. What message or impression do you hope readers will take away from reading your book about California's covered bridges?
Well, I'd like them to take away that they are a of historical importance. Okay, and not only that, but they lead to other discoveries. And in the function of going to go visit these bridges, guess what? You're going to drive by these other little places. Just the other day, we took my stepdaughter and her fiance, and they're from the East Coast. They were out visiting us here the other day here in California, and we took them to one of the covered bridges. As a matter of fact, it's the Nye Crossing one, and it's the longest free span covered bridge in the world. Okay. Well, on the way, there's this lake called Lake Wildwood. It's right alongside the road. And after we visited the bridge, and they were awestruck with the bridge, they really were. And on the way back, it was kind of cloudy weather and everything. And this Lake Wildwood has houses all around it and everything. There's a glory hole, if you know what a glory hole is. When the water rises up so high, it automatically goes over this thing and spills on out of there. And the glory hole is just right off the road there. And as we're driving along, there was a double rainbow over the lake. Okay, and the lake was absolutely dead calm with the houses around it and the glory hole in the corner there. And we stopped and got out our cell phones and took pictures of that thing. And I've got a nice picture of a double rainbow over Lake Wildwood on an absolutely dead calm lake. It's a pretty phenomenal photo. But that's just one, just most recent thing. But in the process, we've discovered a lot of things as we drove around. Um, uh, just little towns here and there that you explore and things. Old mining towns and the like. There's actually a covered bridge up on Lake Tahoe, and it kind of spans where the water comes out of Lake Tahoe into the Truckee River. But there's another bridge, a newer concrete bridge, and when people stop and walk out onto the concrete bridge, they look over the bridge and look down below, and there's a lot of big trout down in there, and you're not supposed to fish down in there, but people will throw bread and stuff to these fish, and they'll come up and eat it and stuff. Now, there's an interesting name for this bridge. They call it Fanny Bridge. If you stand back and look at everybody's standing over there, all you see is a bunch of fannies because everybody's leaned over the bridge looking down into it. But it's a covered bridge that most people wouldn't even know was there.
That's very beautiful. How do you think your book will inspire readers to explore and appreciate these historical landmarks in California?
Well, it really depends upon the reader whether or not they're that inquisitive or not.
Right,
The hope is that it would be like a tabletop book, and they just pick up the thing and go, "Oh, that's kind of interesting. I should go there someday." That kind of a thing,
right.
and maybe do a little research on the internet and things and find out, oh, these things aren't that far away, and go and enjoy them and see what's around them.
Thank
There's a Pony Express um, office, I guess you call it, near that Nice Crossing Bridge. It's just up the road 4 or 5, 6 miles. The Pony Express used that building. The Pony Express, by the way, was only around for a year or two. I don't know if most people know that or not. I've encountered it and other. I belong to a fly fishing club, and we've been doing these things called these trout challenges, in which we try to catch these various species of trout throughout the western United States. And there's like 20 different species, okay? And it takes you to all these different states, as similarly as the bridges do. The bridges take you to different places, okay? And I've encountered the Pony Express Trail 2 or 3 times on those trout trips. And it's kind of interesting, how that came to be, and then how it lost its life, if you will, because of the telegraph. But another historical event that helped the West.
Beautiful, thank you. Lastly, can you tell us about any other places or events near these covered bridges that readers should visit to enhance their experience?
Well, not too far from the bridges up on the Nice Crossing Bridge and the backwards covered bridge. That's kind of fun. That was the oldest covered bridge. Um, they had a dam up above the bridge, break, and the water went down and washed the bridge off of its footings, and it ended up on the side of the river or the creek or whatever. And but it was still intact. It was still in good shape. And they took oxen or something and pulled it back up and pulled it across and reset it down on its foundation. And then they stepped back and took a look at it and go, wasn't that graffiti on the other side last time? That's why it's now called the backwards covered bridge. Okay. And this is up in the Grass Valley, Auburn area. Okay. And not too far from there, on the way down through Auburn, there's 2 or 3 different mines down through there that you can visit, and they're kind of parks and stuff. You can actually go down into one of the mines, and I forget the name of it right offhand. But there's a lot of things like that around. Old towns, the town of Grass Valley and the town of Nevada City, those are fun to explore. The Grass Valley, Christmas time, they have an old-fashioned Christmas, a Victorian Christmas, and there's a lot of people dress up in Victorian dress and everything, and wander the town on the weekends in December and the like. We've also been up to Grass Valley to photograph the one of the bike races, not the motorcycle, but the bicycle races. Like Lance Armstrong kind of a thing. Um, uh, did some photography of a bunch of those kinds of things there. Um, it's I can't remember all the different things we've done, but people are definitely inspired by these covered bridges, and they continue to build them even today. There's a really pretty one up on the Smith River, but it's basically a concrete bridge. It looks to me, but it's made to look like wood, and it's not very big or whatever, but it's very pretty, and it's in a pretty part of the state of California. A person could spend a lifetime visiting various places in California and probably not see all of California.
Thank you for sharing that. Where can we purchase your book?
Get it. You can get it on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and I really don't know of any other places right offhand. This is a function of this industry that you buy shelf space on various bookstores or whatever, but Amazon and Barnes and Noble have it, online. There's also an electronic version of it too that you can get.
Thank you so much. How was your experience working with Authors Press?
It's so far just fine. We'll see what happens here. I've been involved in a lot of different organizations that deal with this stuff. I've actually done a lot of work because of the fire that burned down the Honey Run covered bridge. I did a lot of volunteer work, offered up a number of my books that I I bought at my cost or whatever and gave them to various organizations up there in that neighborhood to sell to, make some money to help the people up in that neighborhood. Um, Bought a number of gift cards for gas because a lot of the teachers in that area that lived in Paradise, they lost their houses, and as a function of that, they ended up having to move to Reading, and there was a pretty long commute, so bought gas cards to take away some of that. Kind of an interesting story. That process, I started off with three metal prints that I had of the Honey Run Bridge. They were printed on the metal, and they cost me $400 a piece. And I was looking to see who I could donate them to that they could raffle them off to earn some money for helping out the community up there and everything. The first place I went to was the Highway Patrol office because they kind of are connected with that kind of a thing all over the place. And I was offering to them first, and they go, "Well, we can't take one of those." But he gave, the information officer, did give me some leads on where to look to do that, and I did eventually give these things away. But in the process, he started telling me the story of his story. He lived in Paradise. Now this is in Chico's where their office is, and that's where I am to talking with him. And he says, "Well, I live in Paradise." Okay, he says, "When that fire was burning, I was just down the street from my house, directing traffic to get people out of Paradise, watching my house burn." Okay. And I said, "Wow, that's horrible. I mean, that was, totally really bad." He goes, "You don't know the whole of it." I go, "Well, what do you mean?" He goes, "Well, I'm a youth director for a church as well as the Boy Scouts. And I had 10 person tents and all that goes with it in terms of the cooking supplies and all that good stuff for camping. That's 100 people, 10 person tents in my house that burned down. And those tents all disappeared. How hard is it going to be to replace those items?" And that was, that hit me pretty hard. Um, uh, there's more to that story, but I'm not going to get into that. I could tell you another story too about it. I mentioned I'm a rideshare driver. While that fire was burning, there was smoke in the air everywhere in the valley, and the rideshare could take me everywhere. It would take me to all kinds of different places in California. I've been to Reno and Fresno and Redding and I mean, you name it, I've been there. Well, Tracy is about 80 or 100 miles away from where the Paradise Bridge is. Okay. And I found my way down there one night, and it was still smoky down there. It was like a really heavy fog. You could only see 20 or 30 feet in front of you. But here's the thing, every night for 2 or 3 weeks, I would run across a road named Paradise, something or other, Paradise Way, Paradise Road, Paradise Avenue, Paradise Boulevard, something like that. Every night I would run across a road named Paradise somewhere. And there was one down in Tracy as well. And every time I'd see that name, I'd come to tears, knowing what was going on up there, knowing those people. And I don't. It takes something to trigger memories of some of this stuff. Um, I ran across a guy. He had phenomenal photos of the fire behind him as he was running from the fire down the road. Okay, I wished I had gotten the photos from him. They're like National Geographic photos, but everything that he knew was burning up behind him. Um, there was a lady that I had in the car next to me in the front seat, and we were driving along and got to talking. This was a couple weeks after the fire or whatever, and this was in Sacramento, which is about 40 or 50 miles from Paradise. And we were talking and about the fire, and she goes, "Well, my family's from up there," and she says, "My grandparents and my parents, they still live up there, except for my dad died a year or two ago." And then she proceeded to tell me, she says, a couple days after the fire started, I got a text from my mom, and it said, "Honey, your grandparents and I, we got away. We're okay. We're safe, and all that good stuff. But you kids, the thing that you don't know is your dad and I, we carved our initials in that Honey Run Bridge, and we visited it every year since. Those initials are now gone, burned up in that fire, and there was no need for it to happen. Um, they had put sprinklers on top of the bridge, and they were pumping water from the creek down below up to those sprinklers to keep the fire from getting to the bridge. The pumps were electric, and they were plugged into a power source that PG&E turned off because of the policies about that kind of thing have been evolving and changing. Every time there's a fire, these people get their fingers in it, and they want to, well, this is what you should do, or this is what you shouldn't do, and this kind of thing. Well, the policy at the time was because of the fire, turn the power off. And so they turned off the power to the entire area, and the bridge burned down unnecessarily. But there's good news about that story too, in terms of the Honey Run Historical Society now owns the property under the bridge and about the bridge, as well as the bridge itself. Whereas prior to the fire, all they owned was the bridge itself. And as a function of that, they can now they're going to be rebuilding the bridge, and they're going to make a nice park around there with picnic benches and things like that for people to enjoy the park, and continue to hold weddings and bar mitzvahs and stuff there and everything, and swimming hole for the kids and what have you. So it'll be a couple of years in getting done yet. It's a slow process for them, but it'll get done. I'm sure of that. I'm in contact with them pretty regularly.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. It was my pleasure speaking with you. Thank you all for joining us today. I hope you found our conversation as interesting as I did. Remember to check out Forrest Oldham's work. Again, this is your host, Gab from Authors Press. Until next time, happy reading. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
You too.
Authors Press.